Hey everybody, welcome back to the custom MobiFlight device tutorial. Today things are going to get incrementally more difficult. If you're familiar with MobiFlight, with Arduino programming, and with Platform I/O, but you've never done a custom MobiFlight device, today will be new for you. The steps we take today are the ones that will take your warm-up device project that I hope you've started to something that actually works in the MobiFlight ecosystem. So when everything works, it's magic. The data just flows and your device will appear just like any other one in MobiFlight client. But when it doesn't work, it's super frustrating and there aren't a lot of error messages. So we'll take this one maybe a little slower than the other tutorials, and we'll get going here. So these configuration steps frustrated me so much every single time that I wanted to create a new device that I wrote a script to automate a lot of the setup, and that's included in your setup template. We'll be using that script today, but it's important that you also understand what that script is doing, or else when problems occur, you'll have no idea where to start looking. So today we're going to start with a fresh template. We'll try out the renaming script, and then we'll go through all these different configuration files and the modifications you're going to need to get your project moving forward. Finally, we'll review some gotchas and some common errors that can occur along the way. We'll be doing minimal actual device coding today, and in the next episode, we'll put everything together and get a simple gauge device working end-to-end using some of the techniques that we're going to go after today. So with that intro, let's get going. We're going to start by getting a fresh copy of the MobiFlight custom device template. We're going to call this a CC demo today, and we'll be targeting the Raspberry Pi 2040, the Raspberry Pi Pico RP2040. So let's grab the community template here. And that was done quick. And so if we take a look, we'll see that we've got something named community template. We're going to rename the directory from community template to, let's call it CC demo. If you haven't figured out, or if you didn't know, my name's Chris Crawford. So I'm going to preface a lot of the stuff today with CC. That'll make it stand out. If we called it MF demo, you might not understand, or it might not be obvious what changed between these different things. So if we take a look at the directory here, you'll see that we've got the familiar stuff. We've got a template directory. And it has the my custom class, my custom device, and all of that. But what we're going to do here, went up one too many. What we're going to do is use this renaming script. So using the Python that we installed in the first episode, we will use this script. And the name of our device, we're going to call it CC, do we say demo, not temp, CC demo. And the author name here is me, Chris Crawford. And we will go ahead and we like that, so we're going to rename it. Now, if we take a look, we'll see that that template is now named CC demo, and some other changes were made in there as well. But let's take a look at that in VS Code, which opened up on another window here. So let me pop this over here. So now we are in, and if we take a look, let's close up a few tabs here just to make this a little bit better, and we can increase the size here. We'll let this go and download. It's busy downloading some stuff. But what we can see, and we can take a look here, is it has renamed that folder from template to CC demo. So let's pop into there while it's busy grabbing some information. And you'll see that all of these, it's no longer my custom class or my custom, what was it before? Anyway, it has renamed our custom class CC demo, and it has renamed the class that, reflected in the header as well. And it has renamed this platform.io.ini. I think this is the platform.io.ini is a good one to, we're done here, so we can close this and let's free up a little more space here. If you're used to platform.io, you're used to seeing a platform.io.ini. This one down here is the one for the entire project. We're not going to touch this one. This is the one for the boilerplate firmware that we're not going to use. What it does is it includes any that it finds in the directories up above named something that ends in platformio.ini, which would include this file. So don't mess with this one. We're going to go for this one. The name of your device, platformio.ini. And what we will see here is two major sections, or several major sections, I guess. There'll be one that overrides everything, or one that sits above it all, named env underscore, then your project name. And then you will have build settings for each of your hardware devices. Right now, there should be about 4 of them in here, 5. Yeah, 5 of them for the different devices. The Pico's at the bottom, and then we see that there's a nano for a nano here, for an Uno, for a micro, and for a mega. I'm only going to do this for the RP2040, so I'm going to delete all of these other ones because I don't need them, and I don't want to waste your time doing a compile for all those. So I just highlighted all those except for the Pico one and deleted those. We've got a much smaller file now. So now let's run through this. So it named this environment. It adds some build flags here that it's going to pick up. It'll pick up some of these down below this in env build flags. And if you didn't realize, a semicolon means a comment in the platformio.ini files. Up first, custom device support, you can turn on and off support for different hardware devices with these flags. Sometimes you turn them off. The reason you might turn them off is just to save memory. If you have some really big ones and you never expect them to be in there, you can turn them off. But since we're doing a custom device, we better have that one turned on. This custom device has update. This is a key one. There's 2 ways really of updating your display. I'm going to assume you're using a display. 2 ways of doing the display. You could update it every time the data changes, or you could update it in a loop. We'll show that when we go in to actually code our device, but just know that if you put code into that update loop, it's not going to fire unless you uncomment this line. Similarly, it's going to, if you wanted to slow down and give yourself a little more polling, a little more interval, the reason you might want it to not poll so fast or update so quickly is you've got encoders or buttons and it's missing presses. So you might want to say, oh, only update every 10 milliseconds or so. Config and Flash is an advanced feature where you can put your configuration right in your code rather than having the user do it through the MobiFlight client. We're not going to cover that right now. Maybe we'll do an advanced topic with that one. And then these reversed outputs are done. That helps. That says, well, the buttons are going to be normally high instead of normally low. Or wait, other way around, normally low instead of high. So it reverses high and low. We won't mess with those right now. And then this final one, this debug to command messenger. Since your MobiFlight device will communicate with the MobiFlight client via the serial port, that means you can't really use the serial port for your debugging messages. You can, but you have to then take them out before you actually hook it up to the MobiFlight client. This will turn on the debug messages and it'll send them out via special command messenger command 255 so that you can actually see them on the MobiFlight console if you need them. We don't mess with these other ones. There are some helpful, if you didn't notice, there are some helpful comments over here explaining a lot of these things. And if you are going to add some libraries, like for your video, your display driver, they would go right here in this upper section under the libdeps capabilities. Firmware versions, you are building for a specific firmware versions. A lot of times the core firmware version for the major versions matches a major version in the client, so you've got to be aware of that. And then we're going to name some folders. This is where things can start getting tricky or not work if you start changing things. So this folder should match this folder, and that tells it where to find everything. No reason to change that. And the name of your custom community project, this will be the name of the folder that goes under your under the community directory in the MobiFlight client. We'll explain that a little bit. And this will create a zip to make it easier for people to copy those files into your community. So that is these are the settings that hold true no matter what your hardware is. Now we get down into the hardware specific settings. If you've ever coded the Pico on the platform IO, it does have some unique settings here, and we'll do that. And even then, a lot of times my code doesn't upload. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens when we get to that step in a little bit. This upload protocol. Sometimes I have to take this out to actually get things to work. Sometimes I have to put it in. I'm really not sure. Now we're getting down into, this is another, these other two are critical as well. This MobiFlight type absolutely must match certain things within your setup. That has to match a type that will be in a couple of these files. And this name, this is the name that you will see by default in as the name of the device in the settings dialog. Usually we want this to be maybe a little bit tighter. We may change this, but right now it's best not to change anything and let things go as they are. These other things are all measured as don't change. Oh, the one example they show in here, this build unflags, this build turns off certain flags. You can turn off support for different things to save memory in this section. I often do this on some of my big projects, but right now we don't need to worry about that. So this is the platform IO ini that you're allowed to edit. All right, let's keep going here. We've got a few more files to look at, but while this is going, I think I'm going to get a compile going because those things can take a while. We don't need to watch it. We'll just toss this down. We'll just toss it all the way out of the way. And let's take a look at some of the community files. These are the files that describe your project to the MobiFlight client. Let's start with the boards. And let's spread this out. So just like we took out some of the other ones, we're not doing an Uno, we're not doing a Nano, we're not doing a Micro, and we're not doing a Mega. We are doing a Pico. So let's take a look at this Pico board that's going on here. There are two concepts here. There's a board and a device. The board is the Raspberry Pi that you're using. The device is the thing that runs on that board. You can have multiple boards if you're giving the end user, you're trying to give your end users the maximum flexibility in choosing their hardware. And each board can have multiple devices. I tend to just focus on a single board because usually my hardware is written specifically and tested specifically on that. I think that that's okay. I think if somebody wants to use one of my custom devices, they're going to be buying a screen, and I'll just tell them, hey, this thing is written to run on an ESP32, or this thing's written to run on a Raspberry Pi. So I'm going to get rid of those other ones. Let's take a look at this board layout. This is a .json file, and so you want to be paying attention to the curly braces and the commas and the double quotes here. The USB drive settings, we don't need to mess with that. The connections, we don't need to be messing with any of this. This is all going to be fine. The hardware IDs, the only time you'd have to mess with this is if you have some weird clone board and it's not appearing at all. Then you'd have to go into the device manager and check that the VID and PID of your device are correct. I've only had that once or twice where I've got an old ESP32 that shows up as a Mega, but I've never had a problem with the RP2040s here on that. We can cover that maybe more in an advanced topic or in the questions. Put some questions in the comments if you've got them. We will allow them to install the firmware from here and to reset the board also from the client. And the firmware base name, this is just a name. If you're going to mess with this, you've also got to change it over here. So we're not going to mess with it. We'll just leave it alone. The firmware extension, we'll leave that alone. And the friendly name here, the friendly name is too long. This is the name, this is the default name that is going to go into the board and will show up there. So I like to, since I'm only doing this for a since I'm only doing it for the Raspberry Pi Pico, we can take that out and we can just shorten that up. We could even shorten it all the way to CC demo as well, since it's kind of redundant, since I prepend CC as my author name onto almost everything, again, just to make it stand out to me. You can mess with your firmware versions if you want to force things to update. And then this MobiFlight type, this is where the type has to match on the board. The type has to also match the MobiFlight type that we did back over here. So where did we put it? Okay, right here. This has to match this, or else it won't work. It won't be seen. So remember that one. The reset firmware file, you don't need to change that. And then device types. I was saying that you can have multiple device types. We're only going to code a single type. And so I can take out this other one. For now, I'm just going to leave it just so everything compiles nice and we don't have to worry about changes. But here, like if I was coding a G5 and I was putting two device types in, maybe one's the PFD and the other one is the HSI. But I think frequently, more likely than not, you'll only be doing a single device type. We'll see where this will come up again in some of the future files as well. This information appears when you add your board, when a user adds a board to their MobiFlight client configuration. So you can update these. I usually name it and I usually put in my GitHub repo. That won't stop it from working though if you mess this up. Module limits. This tells MobiFlight how many devices, what's the max number of these types of devices, of each device that can be added. So if somebody tries to add a seventh output shifter, it's going to say, sorry, you can't do that. We're out of space. Often I will cut these down, or I've typically taken out the I2C support just for space reasons. And honestly, I don't remember whether I'm supposed to set that to 0 or just take the whole line out. I'll have to check that and get back to you. And normally I would only want a single custom device in here as well. So I would just change this, and then the user could only add one of my devices, usually because there's only one screen or enough pins to do that. So now, speaking of pins, all of your pins are listed down here. These are all the default pins for an RP2040. If I may be using like a built device that has a screen already built in, and so a lot of these pins might already be used, in which case I would delete those pins so that the user couldn't accidentally assign a button to one of the pins that is already being used up by my hardware. So taking out these pins to avoid the user making a mistake is key. You're probably not going to add pins here. If you do, I've tried adding dummy pins before for various purposes. It doesn't really work because you'll get it will crash at runtime as the device tries to assign, set a default GPIO input output to one of these pins. So really, you're probably not going to be adding pins, but you will likely be taking them away for your specific device. That goes all the way to the bottom, and that's it. That is the board. That's what defines your hardware and allows the user to add additional devices, including your custom device, to your board when you plug it in. All right, let's go to the devices. I said we would only have one device, and it's created two here, so I could delete that. I'm just going to leave both devices in just for simplicity's sake right now. So let's take a look at this device file. Again, another JSON file, and with a schema that never resolves because this isn't actually in there, but that won't cause a problem. Don't worry about it. The label here, the label of the device, this is something I probably need to change in the script. This string is probably too long. It can only be 16 characters, I want to say, in MobiFlight, and you'll get an error if it's more than 16. It also doesn't like special characters. So usually I reduce this label. Nothing else depends on it, so you're okay cutting this down to something more like that. Now the type though, the type does matter. So this type has to match this label has to match the label that we put right here. This custom device type, this is what links the board to the device. That string right there, it's doing a string comparison. Author and URL or whatever you want them to be. And again, this has a version 2. I get confused. I'll admit, I get confused on what all these different versions are. So generally I don't use a versioning scheme. Now we get into this config. This is important as well. If your device needs pins, so maybe you need a SCL, an SDA, and an interrupt. You could put those in there. You could rename those. These are the names. These will be coming up in the user dialog when they're setting up your device for the 3 different pins that you might need to set that up. Or if they're hardwired, you can take these out. Now there was a bug in the client that I'm not sure if it's fixed yet or not, in that if you didn't have at least one pin, the client would throw up an error that you could usually safely ignore, but it is kind of disconcerting when that pops up. So often what I have taken to do is I will usually just put in dummy pin, and then you can assign it to one of your unused pins. Again, you've already gone through the board and you've only left usable pins in there. We're not actually going to do anything with it, but it does prevent that pin from being used someplace else. So hopefully, I think I put in a PR to fix that, but I'm not entirely sure if it's been merged into the code or not. Anyway, if your device needs pins, you would put them here. So if you had 3 small displays and you wanted to let the user put in multiple ones, this is where you would do it. Or you can take them out. Message types. You are going to be spending a lot of time here. This is how the information gets from the MobiFlight client, which you recall used whatever, the SimVars. It's pulling the SimVars in versus SimConnect via SimConnect. And then it's sending them to your custom device, and this is where you define those. So these label IDs, these are critical. If you remember the set, section method in your code here, so this set, if you remember this guy with all the switch, these numbers are. We don't need the board anymore. These numbers are the same as these numbers. Let me do that one more time. So these numbers in this set function, in this case statement, are the same ID numbers as these. If you change the label, if the user, then the user sees these labels when they're assigning the value. So we'll leave this one in there. You can add and remove these. We'll just do one demo one. If we get to the point of a demo today, this is already going long. Well, maybe we'll do the demo in the next one. If we get to this speed value, so you can put this here. I often like to put this very explicitly as something like, I'll put in the actual thing that I expect the user to use. So I don't know, what is it? Is it airspeed? I don't remember it was in knots or something like that. But let's just say that's what I can't remember what the SimVar is, but if it was there, that's what I would put. That sometimes helps me as I've already gone through and tested everything. So you would go through, and if you needed, I've had projects that have had one of these because it's a simple gauge, like an airspeed gauge. I've had ones that have had over 100 or close to 100, I guess, on that G5 because there is so much information that goes back and forth. So you could add other ones here. Always remember you need a comma in between these. And if it won't look for duplicate IDs, you have to remember to update those. The other thing too is if you change your mind, if you've already deployed this and you've configured something with 0 and you say, oh wait, I want this to be whatever, angle of attack or something. and then you change this, that won't change anything in the actual client. The client will still be sending the same information to 0. The client keys in on this number, the set keys in on this number. These labels are just syntax and label and information to the end user about what to assign to 0. I hope that makes sense. All right, so those are the two devices. These two files go in your community. This last one, the firmware, right now all that's in there is the reset instructions for the board, and those will get built automatically and put into a zip folder. We'll have some gotchas on that as well later. All right, this is starting to go long. I want to keep it tight, so we're going to look at one more, maybe two more files, and then in the next tutorial, we'll start getting into more of the actual configuration and customization of this and go through a really simple example before maybe in the final episode, we'll go through a complete end-to-end. So let's go back over here. We've hit the community files. We've hit the platform.io.ini. Let's take a look at what we're going to change in MobiFlight custom device and customdevice.h. All right, so as you recall, the custom device is what hooks up the rest of the firmware to your file and to your custom class. So this is what instantiates your custom class and passes messages to it from the main MobiFlight firmware. The things you want to look at in here, the things you'll need to customize, remember before we added those pins 1, 2, and 3. The user configured those, and we were using like SCL, SDA interrupt here for some of those. This is where you're going to use those, and that's where you would pass those along. So if we look at my custom device, we will see that the way it's working in the template is we pass pins 1 and 2 in the constructor. Here's the constructor, it's because it has the same name as the class. And if we look at that, what you would do in that constructor that's up here is we're assigning the pins, and then in here maybe you would do something like, set up your wire device with pin 1, pin 2. That's how, so I haven't included the wire, but that's where you would use pin 1 and pin 2. My devices, like I said, most of mine are soldered, and so the user can't change those, so I assign them myself. You're fine just leaving these numbers in here, and you're fine in your demo if you don't use these. You can just leave this alone. I'm going to leave them alone for now. But if you wanted to add more, this is where you would start adding them. So the way you do this is, here's where they're pulling them out of the parameters. One word of warning. If you cut down, if you say, oh, you know what, I only need 2 pins, I'm going to get rid of this third one, and you take out that third pin or from your board, I've closed up the board, but in your board definition, if you added 3 pins, or I'm sorry, it's in your device, isn't it? In your device, if you cut out one of these and you don't remember to take it out of here, if this goes after this will crash. This code is not fair. The template code does not defend against that, so you'll have to remember to take that out as well, if that's what you're going to do. If you remove it from your board, those parameters get passed along. If you decide to take all your pins out, you would have to change this call. Here's where your device gets constructed, and here's where it's passing those pins. Let's see. The other thing to be aware of is this string has to match the type as well. So in your device, this type has to match this string. So don't go changing that if you want. You can redefine my custom device. You could name that whatever. So CCHSI. And that will, as long as you do a rename and don't just do it like I did it, it will be fine. So this is a constant, right? Not a string variable. This is a string variable, and it's doing a stir comp on that parameter that's passed in. So I would recommend not changing that, or if you have to change that later on, you've got to remember to do it in your device as well. I know I'm bouncing around a lot here. Apologize. Let's see. What it's checking to make sure it fits in memory. It's assigning the pins, and it is creating that. If you're not doing a second custom device, you can cut that out. You don't have to though. The detach and the attach will have the same thing, and then there's really nothing. You can simplify this, and maybe we'll do that in the next one. But that's the only thing to be aware of, is changing your pins if you decide to, if your device happens to need more of those. Obviously, if you're changing that there, I'm going to hit F12 to jump to the definition of this. You would take them out here, and then you would take them out in your actual code as well. I think that's a good place to stop. We're already at a half hour, and I think in the next one, what we will do is we'll strip this down and we'll show a little bit of this end-to-end in a very, very simple use case before we go on to create our complete project. If you want me to cover any of these concepts in additional detail in the next video, please add some comments. I'd love to hear those. Or head over to the MobiFlight Discord, where we've got a more interactive discussion, shorter latency discussion going on as well, under the custom device, custom firmware section of the MobiFlight Discord. So next time up, we will go through, we'll start customizing some of this, we'll start building it, and we'll show you a very simple use case of getting some information end to end before, in our final episode, we will build a complete gauge. That's it for now. See you soon.